I'm gonna give you 6 lessons that I learned from Faris Khan, one of the craziest freaks on Instagram, social media, YouTube, and we're gonna start right now. Now, I was fortunate enough to spend a whole weekend with Faris Khan and pick his brain, learn from him, and understand his training, or at least try to understand his training and look at how he breaks things down as simply as possible. And he is undoubtedly one of the best sprints, agility, I would call elasticity, twitchy coaches on the planet. I think he's, as far as himself physically, but also how he is as a coach. I think some of the biggest aspects that I learned was he's so good at taking very, very advanced concepts and making those advanced concepts part of the fundamentals. And I think that I've just been on this big thing lately, one in our business, but two, as far as a strength coach and as far as a throws coach and as far as a weightlifting coach, is like fundamentals, fundamentals, fundamentals. And the more we can execute those fundamentals, the more advanced we can get. That first key lesson from Faris was all around keeping it simple, meaning every single exercise that you're programming has to be goal specific. And if you look at it from the top down in a training program, right, you have your primary goal, and then you know what 3 or 4 secondary goals can feed into it, and then you should be looking at that transfer training. That's how I set up that training pyramid. And when I discussed and watched and spent time with Faris, one of the biggest things that he kept reiterating is that every single exercise has to have a goal. And if you have a goal for that exercise, that goal has to fuel and feed into that primary purpose. So it's keeping that simple and just looking at it instead of just throwing stuff against the wall. Now you're looking at it and you're saying, what can I do as simply as possible to make this as effective as possible to improve the overall training system? That second key aspect is that you have to keep it individualized. And this is an interesting one because a lot of people will say, well, if you're training in a group setting, which I promote, I love group training. I love group training. I think it's way better than individual training, but I like looking at group training and individualizing it. And this is the big thing that Faris brought up. If you're training in a group setting, each individual will have a screening. So if they have a screening, and in his system, they have a screening, so now we can see where they at with their benchmarks and with their testing. And then the individual has their key focus that they need to focus on. And then if they do happen to be training in a group setting, now you could take a team, okay, and you can say, okay, these individuals have these specific characteristics versus this group versus this group. And then you can break that down to individualized cues and then individualized accessories that can also feed that. And this sort of just piggybacks on that first key lesson. But if we can keep it individualized and base that off of the progress, if we've got some type of mobility issue, we've got some type of any injury or specific to that now, or one's playing soccer, one's playing football, one's a wrestler, one's a swimmer, we know if they have this baseline template, how we can individualize it and how we can optimize each individual's training protocols to make them as freaky as possible. That third one, this is gonna be a practical thing that you can take right now, go to the gym and try a split stance trap bar deadlift. Now, this is a conversation that I had with Faris. I've had this conversation with Phil Daru, where I was like, yeah, I don't know about the split stance trap bar deads. I'm concerned about being in a weird position with the hips, concerned about that potentially leading to some back issues. And I remember Phil being like, nah, doesn't happen. You'll be fine. You'll be perfectly fine. And I sort of like just played it off. And then I ended up spending time with Faris. And Faris was like, no, I want you to do it. I want you to actually execute this. I want you to try this. And as soon as I tried it, guess what? My ignorance went away. I was like, what the heck? This feels amazing. This is like a crazy pull version of a single leg squat. Single leg squats, everybody knows, that's my favorite. That's my jam. So if we're looking at the split stance trap bar deadlift, now we can overload it because we're in a trap bar situation. We're gonna be on the floor so we can pull pretty heavy, and it's going to be something that really complements that single leg squat well. So try that out today. That's a third thing that I learned directly from Faris Khan that I wish I would have been a little bit more open-minded to 2 years ago. But now it's something that we're gonna implement into our training, and it's gonna start to open up even greater sports performance. And that's stuff that we're planning out inside of Peak Strength. When we're designing these things, I wanna keep my mind open to learning from as many coaches as possible and making that system as good as possible. How can we create somebody who's strong? How can we create somebody who's explosive? How can we create somebody who's got good endurance? Those are 3 key aspects around that long-term development. And that's exactly what we do inside of Peak Strength. We wanna give you guys 5 free workouts in Peak Strength. So go check that out today. You can download Peak Strength at peakstrength.app, the Google Play Store or the Apple iOS Store. Now, the fourth key thing that I learned from Faris Khan. What is this based off of? Using benchmarks to build your periodization around and then lead into that force velocity curve. Okay, this sounds crazy, but you take the force velocity aspect, okay, and you start to understand where are these different exercises based off of the force velocity spectrum. And you're looking at it, and then you can look at benchmarks over here. And you see benchmarks, you see the force velocity spectrum over here. Now we can take those benchmarks and say, this person's lacking X, Y, or Z based off of the spectrum over here. And now we can understand what really needs to happen in training to develop those benchmarks to get a little bit higher to optimize performance. Then that leads back into the individualization and simplification. You're actually taking advanced concepts of benchmarks and the force velocity aspect here, designing periodization as simply as you can. It's just looking at the problem right in front of you. And that's a big aspect around periodization that he covered in our on-site virtual summit to go over that, recognize that, test that, use individual testing protocols so that we can get that feedback and then improve each person's programming. That fifth key lesson. This one's going to be another one that you guys could try today. And this is one that I played around with, but again, I have to admit, I was ignorant. This is that sled marching is way more effective than I originally thought. And so we did some simple sled marches with 45 pounds on the sled, something like that, real light, real easy stuff. And I was just sort of playing around with it, feeling it out. And I'm going, sled marching to me is one, an easy way to improve running technique. Two, it's an easy way to feel that ground reaction forces. It's a way to put force into the ground. And as Patrick Mahomes describes his running back Pacheco's running style, he's angry at the ground. And I actually think like when you're doing those sled marches, you start to feel that. And it's also something that I believe that we could be using on an impulse day with single leg squats. You compare that with that sled march and you put a little bit extra weight on that sled and you focus on that marching, and that's gonna improve speed, that's gonna improve locomotion, and it's even going to lead to better jumping capabilities. So use sled marches inside your impulse day, inside an athlete day, in some type of contrast training, and that's gonna help you become a better athlete. Thank you, Faris Khan. And then finally, this is gonna be the one that's maybe a little bit more general, but I really think, when we talk through that fundamentals aspect, the biggest thing that I learned from Faris is his level of accountability. Okay, he talked about how when he was younger, he didn't play a lot of sports, he goofed around a little bit here and there, and then he started to realize his potential and his capability that he was letting go, and now he's got a family, he's trying to take care of things, and now he's realizing that he has to be attentive to details. So he has to pay attention to every single aspect around his life, around his training, around his nutrition, around recovery with sleep and things like that. And I talk about this in a past video where even when we were talking to him about how he trains during Ramadan, and that's a big aspect inside of his faith, is just how he can manage his time of training. They don't drink or eat food from sunup to sundown, and how he goes about doing that and what that means for him spiritually, but then also how he takes care of those details when he's actually training during Ramadan, and then how that goes into his regular life outside of that time frame. And I think that that's something that a lot of us could improve upon, myself included, is just every single day. Look at every single moment or every single day that you wake up that you're trying to make it better than yesterday, that you're going to try and treat yourself as well as you possibly can in that moment, in that day, in that time frame, and that you're going to do that again tomorrow and again tomorrow and again tomorrow. And when you're paying attention to every little detail, you realize that you can make substantial gains across the board with everything, in your relationships, in your healing, in your recovery, in your performance, in your intellectual thought process, and all those things can optimize yourself to just becoming a better person. So take these 6 tips from Faris Khan that I've learned directly from him. Use them today. Try out that sled march, try out that split stance trap bar deadlift. They're phenomenal exercises, and then go check him out. He's an absolute freak of nature, because remember, freaks, if you want to become a champion, you've got to stop being ignorant to those specific exercises, and you've got to cultivate your power. Peace.